So let's take a look at SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. The underlying principle of this SDG is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. A very fine aspiration. Leaving no one behind. That's a theme that pervades the SDGs and a statement you will hear quite commonly when you're reviewing sustainability literature. In order to do that, we will require an intensified focus on the 1 billion slum dwellers that exist on our planet as we are. The number of countries with local disaster risk reduction strategies nearly doubled between 2015 and 2021. It's up now to nearly 100. In sub-Saharan Africa, less than a third of city dwellers have convenient access to public transportation. That's a third of city dwellers. That's a shocking figure. As cities grow, municipal solid waste problems mount. Globally, municipal solid waste has problematic issues. While 82% of it is collected, only 55% is managed in controlled facilities. So again, like SDG 10, SDG 11 has 10 targets. Target 11.1 by 2030, ensure access for all to adequate, safe and affordable housing and basic services and upgrade slums. I think everyone would be aware that that's an issue that's of particular relevance in Ireland at the moment. Affordable housing, safe housing. Globally, it's estimated that 1.6 billion people live without adequate shelter. 1 in 7 people on the planet currently lives in a slum. 1 in every 4 people will live in a slum by 2030, according to current estimates. In some countries, as much as 90% of the urban population live in slums. What would it have been like living in a slum during the COVID pandemic? What is it like living in a slum at any stage, on any day? How do we monitor this? What are the indicators? The proportion of urban population living in slums, informal settlements, or inadequate housing. The statistic that we look at there. Target 11.2. By 2030, provide access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport systems for all, improving road safety, notably by expanding public transport with special attention to the needs of those in vulnerable situations, women, children, persons with disabilities, and older persons. Reliable, accessible, and affordable public transport reduces pollution and traffic and promotes productivity and inclusion. Only half of the world's urban population has convenient access to public transportation, according to 2019 data from 610 cities in 95 countries worldwide. Do you think it's possible for a person to get away from poverty without access to decent transport, to public transport? The indicator for this is the proportion of population that has convenient access to public transport by sex, age, and persons with disabilities. Target 11.3. By 2030, enhance inclusive and sustainable urbanization and capacity for participatory, integrated, and sustainable human settlement planning and management in all countries. This is basically addressing the target we just discussed. The indicator here is the ratio of land consumption rate to population growth rate. Target 11.4. Strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. Heritage is our legacy from the past, what we live with today, and what we pass on to future generations. Our cultural and natural heritage are both irreplaceable sources of life and inspiration. World Heritage Sites belong to all the peoples of the world, irrespective of the territory on which they are located. The indicator for this target is the total per capita expenditure on the preservation, protection, and conservation of all cultural and natural heritage by source of funding. When read as it's written, this is a bit of a mouthful, but the key here is to, by 2030, significantly reduce the number of deaths and the people affected by disasters, including water-related disasters, with a focus on protecting the poor and people in vulnerable situations. There is a second target in there, substantially decrease the direct economic loss caused by said same disasters. The Indicators for this particular target are the number of deaths, missing persons, and directly affected persons attributed to disasters per 100,000, which is clear. The direct economic loss attributed to disasters in relation to global GDP. The damage to critical infrastructure and the number of disruptions to basic services attributed to disasters. So clearly, this target is about reducing the impact of natural disasters. Less than half of the least developed countries and only one-third of the small developing island states have a multi-hazard early warning system, meaning their mortality rate is likely to be 8 times higher than countries that are equipped. So again, I think it's very, very clear throughout a lot of the SDGs and a lot of the targets that we look at that the poorer, least developed countries are much more vulnerable in so many ways. Target 11.6. By 2030, reduce cities' adverse per capita environmental impact, including by paying special attention to air quality and municipal and other waste management. It's estimated that there are approximately 1,300 premature deaths annually in Ireland due to poor air quality from fine particulate matter, PM5. We'll talk about what that actually means in the relevant unit. The choices we make in how we heat our homes and how we travel directly impact the quality of the air we breathe. The indicator for this target, proportion of municipal solid waste collected and managed in controlled facilities out of total municipal waste generated, and the annual mean levels of fine particulate matter, PM2.5 and PM10 in cities. PM2.5 is particulate matter that's below 2.5 microns, and we will go into the detail of that and how it's looked at, as I say, in detail later on. Target 11.7. By 2030, provide universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces, particularly for women and children, older persons, and persons with disabilities. The indicators for this target are the average share of the built-up area of cities that is open space for public use for all by sex, age, and persons with disabilities, and the proportion of persons victim of physical or sexual harassment by sex, age, and disability status, and the place of occurrence. Target 11A. Support positive economic, social, and environmental links between urban, peri-urban, and rural areas by strengthening national and regional development planning. The indicator here is the number of countries that have a national urban policy or regional development plan that respond to population dynamics, ensure balanced territorial development, and increase local fiscal space. I think we're very unfortunate in Ireland to have a very well developed planning system. It may not be perfect, and there may be mistakes made perhaps in it, but it certainly provides for good overall infrastructural planning. Target 11B. By 2020, substantially increase the number of cities and human settlements adopting and implementing integrated policies and plans towards inclusion, resource efficiency, mitigation and adaptation to climate change, resilience to disasters, and development and implementation, in line with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Quite a mouthful, but I think it's pretty clear what that means. The indicators for this are the number of countries that adopt and implement national disaster risk reduction strategies in line with the Sendai Framework, and the proportion of local governments that adopt and implement local disaster risk reduction strategies in line with national disaster risk reduction strategies. We will be going into a fair amount of detail on that particular issue in SDG 11 unit later on. Target 11C. Support least developed countries, including through financial and technical assistance, in building sustainable and resilient buildings utilizing local materials. This is something that would be very close to my own heart from coming from a construction background. Local materials, sustainable building, really important issues that we can all contribute to and that we can all have a look at. That concludes our brief overview of the 5 goals that relate the SDGs to prosperity. Thank you.